Algeria swears in a new president after an election few people wanted. Protesters rejected Abdelmadjid Tebboune as illegitimate. So how will he manage his critics? And can he end months of demonstrations demanding political change? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Dareen Abughaida. For the first time in 20 years, Algeria has a president who isn't Abdelaziz Bouteflika. The former leader stepped down in April when thousands of people rallied against his bid for a fifth term in office. But it appears many people are also unhappy with the man taking over. Abdelmadjid Tebboune was sworn in on Thursday after winning last week's election, which had the lowest turnout in Algeria's history at less than 40%. The former prime minister was one of 5 candidates who all had ties with Bouteflika. Tebboune has offered to hold talks with protesters who for 10 months have been calling for a complete overhaul of the political system. He says the election put Algeria back on the path to legitimacy.
This is a big success and the fruit of the civil movement. Our people felt that things needed to be changed in order to stop the demise of the state and its institutions. I sincerely thank the citizens for their contribution to the success of this democratic, free and transparent process. I thank them for their confidence.
So who is Abdelmadjid Tebboune? Well, the 73-year-old businessman didn't enter politics until he was in his 40s. That was in the early 1990s. In 2017, he served as prime minister for less than 3 months before being dismissed by the former president Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Tebboune will need to win over anti-government protesters who say the election was a ploy by the old guard to maintain their grip on politics. And he'll have to try and fix a struggling economy. Energy revenues have been declining, forcing severe cuts to state spending. But the biggest test for the new president could be his relationship with the military. The powerful army chief, General Ahmed Ghaid Saleh, called the election after Bouteflika stepped down. Let's introduce the panel. Here in Doha, Youcef Bouandel is joining us. He's a professor of political science and international relations at Qatar University. In Algiers, via Skype, Amel Boubekeur. She's a research fellow at the School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences. Also in Algiers via Skype is Hinane Kadi, Associate Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Program at Chatham House. Welcome to you all. Thanks very much for joining us. Amel Boubekeur, now that the new president Tebboune has been sworn in, talk us through what the mood is in the country and what's being said.
Well, the feeling is that this is business as usual. You know, the Algerian regime has always used demands from change, demands emanating from the people in order to internalize them and to stay in power. So once again, people were willing to get rid of Bouteflika. They have a new president, and according to the regime, that's enough. But according to the people, not enough, not at all. Because for them, this is all the same old recipes, putting a puppet president while the army is trying to everything in order not to negotiate with the people, especially not to negotiate a transition. So the mood within the Herat is that riots or protests are going to go on, and riots maybe in some part of the country may emerge. And on the side of the regime, they are trying to do what they have done under Bouteflika, trying to talk about the youth, trying to talk about the renewal and of the constitution and the institutions without having any kind of deep reform. So yes, business as usual again, and still the statement in the country.
Even though, Amel, I'll just stick with you for a moment. In his speech earlier on Thursday, he did say that a comprehensive strategic plan must be laid to pass the current political situation and to also begin reforming the country. What do you make of those words, and was there anything else for you that you took away from his speech?
Well, according to the Herat and according to all internal and external observers, any serious change in the country won't be able to happen if the army is not able to think about its position, about the way it is actually ruling and using civilian politics. I mean, There's no doubt that Tebboune has been chosen by the army, not by the people. And if the army, again, is not ready to open a transparent negotiation process with the people, there won't be any new. And for the first time, it's true that somehow Tebboune was the ideal candidate. He's not a mujahid, on the contrary to the old revolutionary legitimacy of the old political class. He's not ruling, or he has not ruled under or through a classical party like the FLN, the administration party, but still, I mean, he's, as you have mentioned it, a part of the old regime. And again, even his presidential program was quite vague, with no incentives at all in order to renew the way institutions functions under the tutelage of the army.
Okay, let's bring in Hinane. Tebboune, in his speech on Thursday, also, he did say that he extends his hand to the protest movement, the Herat, for a dialogue. How do you think the protest movement is going to respond to that?
I think it would not be easy for him to calm down the streets. Many people see him as somebody who represents the continuity of the Algerian pouvoir, that's the Algerian system. And so people are not happy about this, because when people took to the streets in February of this year, it was about radical change. It was about transforming the political regime in a meaningful way. And clearly, Tebboune does not represent this rupture with the old system. So it will be complicated for him to change to calm down the streets. In his speech today, he mainly spoke about reforming the constitution. And, it very much seems like a usual maneuver of the system to kind of just keep things going and continue business as usual without introducing any real change. But people are very much aware of this. Many argue that he was not elected, and that the official numbers that say that he was elected with over 58% of the voices are just wrong, and that he was basically appointed by the military. And so it's going to be complicated and hard for him to convince the streets. There is a huge gap of trust in Algeria's political scene.
Right.
And he will have to make very significant moves to calm down the protesters on the streets.
And you yourself, Hinane, you wrote this very recently: as paradoxical as this may be, cancelling the electoral process scheduled for December the 12th would be a win for the democratic struggle in Algeria. Now that the election went ahead, and you have a new president that has been sworn in, do you see this then as a setback for the democratic struggle, as you put it, in Algeria?
It's clearly some sort of win for the regime. However, I don't think that the Herat is defeated, because people are continuing to protest. People are conscious that this president lacks legitimacy. And so the regime is not in this powerful posture, because Tebboune very much lacks legitimacy. And this is why he's trying to engage a dialogue with the Herat and people within the opposition and civil society groups. He feels that his leadership is weak and heavily contested. And so it's still a battle. And I think that the good side is that the people in the streets are still protesting. And so we will have to sit at a negotiating table at some point to negotiate Algeria's democratic transition.
Okay. Youcef Bouandel, my two guests from Algeria, they seem to say this is business as usual. How do you see all of this? And same question to you. The president has proposed dialogue with the Herat movement. Is this a good move? Is this perhaps a new chapter in Algerian politics?
I mean, I would see it as a new chapter in Algeria's politics. When the Herat began on the 22nd of February, the first thing that they asked for is no fifth term for President Bouteflika. That's the main demand. And as weeks went by, the ceiling of demands has increased. Obviously, regardless of whatever happened, President Tebboune is the president of Algeria today. So many people talk about he lacks legitimacy and so on and so forth, which I understand, but I would argue that legitimacy has never been in an important issue in Algeria's politics. Arguably the most popular presidents of Algeria were Houari Boumediene and Mohamed Boudiaf. Both of them were not elected. Boumediene, for instance, came to power through a coup d'etat, and Boudiaf came to power brought in by the military after the cancellation of the electoral process in January 1991. Obviously, what the elections has done today is divided the Algerian people the big time. I mean, division that is reminiscent to the late 80s and early 90s between so-called Islamist radicals and the radicals within the military. Even before Tebboune was sworn in as president, some representatives of the Herat were talking about negotiations or dialogue. I agree with your second guest from Algiers that the main problem in Algeria's politics today is lack of trust. Tebboune made, in his speech, he made some kind of promises that he will be inclusive. He talked about a new Algerian, a new republic. That means he's talking about a break away from past practices, a right protective regime, and so on and so forth, which, as far as I can tell, is music to everybody in Algeria, in Algeria's ears. But the problem is to what extent is he going to deliver on this, and whether Algerians would believe him now. I guess that the first 3 or 4 months of his tenure in office will determine to what extent he's going to go with his policies.
And this is something that was brought up from my guest in Algeria. To what extent is the military going to be sort of pulling the strings behind the scenes?
The Algerian military has always been pulling the strings behind the scenes since before 1962. Every single Algerian president since 1962 until today has always been a military man or enjoyed the support of the military. So the military is not going to go away. It will always be there. It may act as a watchdog as long as its interests are not affected by whatever President Tebboune is going to do. I think that he will get the support he needs from them.
Amel, to what extent can he actually show that he's not part of the ruling powers? And can he show that he's going to preside differently?
I think, if I may, this is not a good question. We should shift the paradigm here. We're asking about Tebboune's influence towards the Herat as if it was the Herat who has in its hand the solutions, the power to reform institutions and to or to control the police and repression, for example. We should shift the paradigm and ask about, if we are to talk about Tebboune as a president, is Tebboune able to have any kind of influence on the army? Will Tebboune be able, for example, to fragment or to play on the divergences that already exist within the army circles, as Bouteflika did so by putting Gaïda Saleh in 2004 at the head of the army and marginalizing generals who managed the civil war? Has Tebboune this kind of influence? I don't think so. And that's where the stalemate is actually. I don't think that Tebboune will be able to encourage or to put pressure on the army in order to reform from within, in order to stop repressing people. I mean, the same day he was talking about dialogue, a lot of people in Wahran, in Oran, the western city of Algeria, have been violently repressed. And this has launched a total solidarity campaign throughout the country with the repressed demonstrators. So this is really the question. Now, what kind of pressure can be put on the army commandment in order to do politics for real and not just this charade of having the civilian president once again?
Okay, let's put that question. Okay, let's put that point of view then to Hinane. Is he going to be able to put pressure on the army?
Well, I think this is going to be a big challenge. And, usually because so many argue that he has quite a close relationship to Mr. General Gaïda Saleh, it will be difficult for him to, kind of put back the military, into a smaller, position within the Algerian political scene. So this is going to be a real challenge. However, regarding the Herat, he will have to make important moves if he is to calm down the streets.
Such as what?
So at the moment, we're counting over 300 political detainees. These are people who were arrested and put into jail for their political views. And several students and young people were sent to jail for basically carrying the Berber flag. So these people would have to be released immediately before engaging any kind of negotiation with the Herat or with the civil society. Also, the media are completely closed and shut down in Algeria. Any person presenting different views from those of the regime are not allowed into public media and private media as well. The justice system is completely controlled politically and has served as a tool of the political system for decades. So if Tebboune wants to calm down the situation, he will have to show that there are significant changes in the way the judiciary system functions, in the way the media scene functions. Also, the political scene is completely controlled. It's very complicated in Algeria to open a new political party or an association or to voice views that are radically opposed to those of the system in place. And so I think that Tebboune will have to make important moves if he wants to appease the Herat and calm down Algerians. And I don't think any serious negotiation or dialogue can be engaged without important moves from the regime's side.
And Youcef Bouandel, from the Herat side, Hinane was outlining a few points that the Herat would want to see. I mean, for you, what would constitute a victory for the Herat movement?
I think if President Tebboune ensures that his promises are fulfilled, because he made a number of promises during his election manifesto and during the election campaign, even though it was limited, and also in his speech on Thursday. So I guess if Tebboune starts some sort of a process of reform, like he said, that would be something very tangible. Obviously, it's very, very early because Tebboune was inaugurated on Thursday. Friday, Saturday is the weekend, and obviously I think it will be a mistake to condemn him at this stage. I would say, for at least now, let's try to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I understand his doubts given the slack or this important lack of trust between the rulers and the ruled. But Tebboune has a very, very, very difficult job to do, not necessarily the Herat, but tackling the socio-economic problems that Algerian people
Which I wanted to ask you about. Talk to us about some of the economic problems, because they run deep in Algeria. Very
deep in Algeria. For instance, we can talk about unemployment, lack of housing, the minimum wage, which is about 18,000 dinars, which is not enough for a family to live on for, let's say, a week. Corruption, which is a very, very important issue, and we saw so many oligarchs in jail, and according to reports, there's something like 480 cases opened against former officers. When I say former officers, admin people throughout Algeria. Anybody who held a position of responsibility will answer for his or her acts in front of a competent court of law, and so on and so forth. So these are very, very important issues that Tebboune on the economic social side has to deal with. Also on the legal constitutional side, he will have to face those particular things. As an olive branch, he may, and I think that he should, also free those political prisoners. If they have a case to answer before a competent court of law, try them. Otherwise, they should be freed. He talked about, for instance, the media. He talked about a new constitution. He talked about the foundation for a new republic. All those things will take time. And I think if he fulfills at least some of the promises, he will start slowly he will start to win over some doubters. Obviously, there will be some extremists out there, even after a year or year and a half, they will never agree with him, and they will always doubt him. But I think he's got a very daunting job to do, and it's not going to be easy.
Amel, Boubekeur, did this election answer any of the demands of the Herat movement for you at all?
Look, we were just talking about the economic situation. The two arguments that the regime has put ahead in order to solve the economic crisis are not doable at all. First, the narrative on the mafia, the Isabet. The time of the mafia under Bouteflika is done, and now with all these trials on corruption, we are going to start a new economic era. I mean, do you really think that having these trials is without any structural reform, structural economic reform, will be enough to have a proper economic situation in Algeria, especially that these trials are so intersected. I mean, everybody is involved, even Tebboune's son himself. And by the way, using corruption trials in order to put political pressure on people they want to work with them or not has always been a classical tool on the side of the Algerian regime. So corruption, the narrative on corruption won't be enough. And then you have the law of fine 2020 that is still going on with subsidies and redistribution of the rent, of crumbles of the rent actually, and that's not doable because they don't have the money to do so. But actually, I think the Herat is already beyond that. I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but the Herat is already trying to cancel any sign of political authority of the regime. That means that they don't recognize and they don't acknowledge the parliament as legitimate, not only the president and the party, but also any kind of classical tool that the regime will try to impose upon them to do politics. So they are trying to do politics on their own, and people have been talking for some months now, and it has the election has accelerated these debates. They are talking about organizing their own referendum. They are talking about organizing their own elections. They are talking about the centralization of political representativeness through local committees. So it will be quite difficult to do that because security and repression is still very, very important.
Well, let me just ask you then about the peaceful nature, the relatively peaceful nature of the demonstrations that we've seen so far. Amel, is there a risk that this changes?
Look, I'm sure that they will still try to repress somehow some specific parts of Algeria. They will try to break the unity that we have seen within demonstrators. But that's something that will be very difficult to do. It's go back to massive repression like in the 90s. Don't forget that the army, and I'm not talking about the commandment, are still, militaries are still somehow traumatized by what occurred in the 90s. And there's a very, very important and crucial point, if I can comment on that, is the law on reconciliation that de facto gave impunity to generals. And actually the question of amnesty of these crimes during the 90s civil war is the real question. And that's also a question that Herat should have a clear position on.
Okay, let me just jump in there for the sake of time. And Hinane, the last question over to you. We were just hearing about the 1990s, obviously in the civil war then. To what extent does this legacy of the civil war factor at all into the calculations of people today as Algerians continue with their struggle and they take it forward?
Well, I think there is a new generation, and this is what the movement shows, the Herat really shows, is that people who were born during the 1990s, don't very much have the souvenir of the war. And so they're willing to go further and demand more rights and more change. So for many years, the regime has used the threat of violence and they kind of insisted on the violence and the horror that Algeria went through during the 1990s to kind of keep people calm and to keep them from demanding any significant political change. But now this discourse doesn't work anymore. And actually, it's one of the slogans of the Herat. People say, basically, we're not unthreatened anymore. And Algeria is not Syria, Algeria is not Libya. So while the discourse of violence and the threat of violence has heavily been used by the regime, it seems that it's not an argument that has been working.
All right. So on that note, I'll have to leave it there. Thank you. Thank you very much, Hinane, for joining us from Algeria. Amel, Boubekeur, thank you as well. And Youcef Bouandel here with us in Doha. We thank you for joining us on Inside Story. Thanks for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. You can go for further discussion to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is AJ Inside Story. For myself and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.